There we go. Recording is started. And here we go.
Okay, I guess we're ready. All right, one thing that I want to do before we start is let's go over Q&A. So there is a little Q&A pop-up or icon, and if you have questions, we'll have you drop those questions into the Q&A platform. I may start a little conversation also, and so there is also a chat. Mind you, I'm not going to be able to read all the chat and the Q&A, but I have some people at the ready to help me do that. But it's always a little more fun if you can participate. So if you could have your chat ready and your Q&A ready, we'll be ready to go. So I do have a comment already or a question. Would we have access after it's over? I'm at my son's performance. Kudos to you, Gretel. So I'm going to say yes, they'll be on YouTube, and Teachers Discovery will have them all recorded for you. So anyway, so we'll get started. Thanks for being here tonight, everyone. I know that you had a hard day teaching, and I don't mean that as an understatement. I mean, you had a hard day teaching. Teaching is hard. So thanks for being here, really. And thanks to Teachers Discovery for hosting. And let's get rolling because I've got lots to share. For those of you who know me, reading is near and dear to my heart. And in particular, reading as it pertains to how we use it to facilitate language acquisition. And so either way, no matter how we look at reading and developing literacy skills, what we have to remember is that whether you're reading in your first language or your second language, it's really not about reading. It's really not about teaching learners how to read. It's really all about teaching them to love to read. It's teaching them to love to read. In Jim Trelease's book, The Read Aloud Handbook, you see it right here. It's a fabulous book. I highly recommend it. He says, what we teach children to love and desire will always outweigh what we make them learn. And that is so true. And this hit home for me this week in a very real way. I was at my daughter's and I was spending time with my granddaughter, and because it was President's Day, her brothers were home. And one of her brothers, who is 10, is not what we would classify a quote good student. He struggles getting good grades in school. And so he was in a bit of trouble for not getting good grades. And so the day was supposed to be a day of restrictions, and I don't want to say suffering, but you know, he was grounded, so he shouldn't have enjoyed the day. And so I had a heart-to-heart with him. I've had several chats with him, and the poor kid just doesn't like school, and for good reasons. So I talked to him and I said, you know, if you really just read more, it would help you in every other subject area. Because even if you don't understand something, if you know how to read, you could teach yourself just by reading. And then I just asked him if he wanted to read some books. I said, you could read some books to your baby sister, and you and I could read some books together. What do you say? And so he said, sure. So I went and picked out some books for baby sister. He picked out some books for himself. And on and off the entire day, we spent hours reading. And it was really interesting. I read to him, he read to me, he read to his baby sister. And at the end of the day, that should have felt like punishment. He said to me, "Thank you. I had such a fun day. You make reading so fun." And honestly, I was probably in trouble because he was supposed to suffer that day, but I felt like I hit a home run. I just thought, this is amazing. And another really interesting thing that happened was that we read with the baby sister, my little granddaughter right there, and we read alongside of her. And just even as we were interacting and not reading to her, she was reading on her own, modeling the behavior that she saw in front of her. So just for fun, I'll let you watch just a few seconds. Listen to her read to herself. Sophia, what are you reading? What are you reading, honey? Okay. The interesting thing is that if we just model loving reading, and if we have texts that are comprehensible, we can train learners how to read for enjoyment. We can train them to love it. Incomprehensible texts will always raise the affective filter. If you have a comprehensible text, it's going to lower the affective filter. And if you have ever taught non-literate, pre-literate, or students with weak literacy skills, okay, you know what a struggle it is for them to just crack open a book. It's painful, it's stressful. They don't enjoy it. I classify them as fragile readers because at the first occurrence of a word they don't really understand, they just kind of check out. If you have them read out loud and do popcorn reading, they'll say the words accurately. They'll say them out loud. They might even use expression, but they're really not comprehending anything. The key is to get them to enjoy it. And that's why we say comprehensible, compelling texts will destroy the affective filter. I love what Krashen says in his compelling input hypothesis. He says, if the input is so interesting and so compelling, students won't even realize that it's in the target language. And that's what we're going for. We're going for input that is so comprehensible and so enjoyable and so compelling, students forget it's in the target language and they end up loving the read. But we have to change our mindset. We're not making them read and we're not building literacy. What we're doing is we're helping them learn to love reading. And when we talk about text, I'm talking about any type of reading. Texts come in all sizes, shapes, forms, levels, and lengths. It could be a newsprint article, it could be a children's book, it could be one of our Fluency Matters comprehension-based readers, it could be an Eric Carle book, whatever it is you are reading. You have to remember, it isn't about the reading. It's about using the reading to camouflage our overt attempts to sustain interaction in the target language. What I mean by that is this. Generally, teachers are a little bit stressed out about reading. They don't know how to do it for sure, so they jump into it and they just start reading and they get flustered, and learners get flustered because they're not really enjoying the reading, and not only that, they're not even understanding it. But you have to remember, it's not about the reading itself. It's really about how we're using the reading. We're using the reading to camouflage these overt attempts to sustain interaction in the target language. We don't want learners to see or recognize that we are, quote, preparing them to read. We're not preparing them to read, we're preparing them to enjoy a text. That's what you have to remember. You're not preparing them to take a test, you're not preparing them to understand, you're preparing them to enjoy. How do you understand and how do you enjoy texts the most? Well, you can only enjoy texts that you understand, and you can only enjoy the ones that you really can connect to emotionally. So I have 3 strategies when I'm preparing my students to enjoy a text. And so the first thing is that we connect to the topic. And I'll show you lots of ways. I'm going to show you a smattering of lots of different types of readings that I do to help students connect to a topic. And in that topic will contain naturally, inherently, all the vocabulary that you need to discuss that topic will be in the text. It's what Krashen really refers to as narrow listening. When you listen to his narrow listening hypothesis, he says if you listen to a variety of audio recordings about the same topic, you'll notice that the vocabulary used among all of those sound bites will have very similar vocabulary. Why? Because we naturally need very similar vocabulary to have a discussion about the same topic. And so what you'll notice in everything that I do, everything is topically driven, because I know that if I stick with a topic, I will naturally familiarize students with the language or the vocabulary that they need to engage. And when I say engage, I'm talking about engagement not only in the reading process itself and in the text. I'm talking about engaging in what you're doing in class, whether it's an activity or it's a discussion or whatever it might be. I'm going to familiarize my students enough with the content, the language, the topic, so that they can engage and be emotionally connected to what it is we're working on. The last thing that I don't do, you can look at it one of two ways. I don't tell them we're going to read a book. I don't tell them, hey, we're going to be reading this book now, so that's why I'm doing all of these activities, and that's why I'm starting these conversations, and that's why we're doing what we're doing. I don't want them to know. I don't want them to see that on the back end, I'm really orchestrating everything. I'm engineering everything so that I can have some truly authentic conversations in a communicative sense. And communicative means that I'm really communicating. I'm not artificially asking questions and getting information that isn't useful or relevant. I'm trying to frame everything in a really strategic way so that it actually is communicative. There's communicative intent, even though I'm strategically working backward to help my students enjoy an upcoming text. As we prepare for a reading, I generally spend well over half my time on pre-reading activities or pre-reading strategies. After we do lots of, quote, prep, even though it won't feel like prep, no one will ever know that everything that I have just done over the course of the last 1, 2, or 3 weeks is intentionally done to prepare you to enjoy a text. They won't know it. They might make the connection once we start reading the book, but at the get-go, they don't know it. They just think that we're just doing our normal thing. We're just talking with each other and communicating. So if you think about reading and how reading really works, it follows this continuum of really this micro knowledge and micro comprehension, where readers, whether they're emergent readers or fluent readers reading in a second language, they shift from understanding and paying attention to just single words, or maybe just a few words at a time. And eventually they're able to put words into phrases and they'll understand them at the phrase level. And then they gradually develop more literacy and more comprehension until they understand short sentences and paragraphs and the whole message that's on a page. And so it's really this shift from going from micro understanding to macro. You understand the little words and little pieces, and pretty soon you can put it together to understanding a message. And if you're dealing with early language learners, if you're dealing with novice language learners, if you're dealing with pre-literate students, I'm going to implore you to be really intentional about helping them develop skills before you overwhelm them. So my students, many of them have really weak literacy skills. And many of them had maybe a very low background in education, or let's say a minimal background in education. Others of them, were college educated, but I had many that struggled with reading and struggled in school. Why? Because they were athletes and they spent all their time really on the ball field and not in school learning. And so I'm really intentional with them when I'm trying to teach them to read. And so when I'm preparing them to read, I will just come up with one phrase that I show them over and over and over, and I eventually add more to that phrase. I'm just going to show you just a little snippet of an example of what I do to help them read. So the first thing I do is I engage them with photos of themselves. Every student loves to see photos of themselves. And so every chance I get, I'll snap photos of them. And I put together this really simple little slideshow, literally 5 minutes. I import my photos and I just write these simple little sentences and we read it together. Now, the reason I like this, now this is PhotoPeach. I like it because I can hit the play button and I can stop it. It's not like Kahoot and other games where when you push the button, the timer's ticking, 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 ticking. You know, if you have a fragile learner or fragile reader in front of you, they shut down, they can't take it because they know the time is ticking. So I like PhotoPeach because I can make up these little slideshows and I can stall it and pause it and we can discuss it and we can read it together and we can ask questions and we can really hammer out this little phrase. If you haven't caught it yet, it's watching the game, okay? Watching. And it's just basic high frequency language built into a slideshow to help them develop both listening comprehension and reading comprehension as we discuss what we're reading. So there's one easy little trick to help your students develop literacy skills. I'm going to show you another kind of reading. So if we have out in the audience tonight some elementary teachers, elementary language teachers, I can't really see what you're communicating here. I don't see the chat window, but everybody else can. So if you are an elementary language teacher, just give yourselves a little toot your own horn tonight. Woohoo, way to go, elementary teachers. Ah, okay. So I'm going to use another example just for you. So let's say that we were preparing to read The Very Quiet Cricket. I'm going to reiterate that I would not tell my students that I'm going to read this book. I'm going to just share a few little strategies that I use. Yes, I taught elementary for 5 years. People often don't know that about me. I taught kindergarten through 8th grade Spanish for 5 years. So here's one of just a few strategies that I used. And yes, I used Eric Carle's Very Quiet Cricket. Wait, do I have the quiet cricket up there or the hungry caterpillar? Oh, I have the quiet cricket, but we're going to use, sorry guys, we're going to use the hungry caterpillar, another Eric Carle book. So let me tell you about the very hungry caterpillar. The caterpillar's hungry and he eats lots of different things. So what I do is I take 3 of those items from the book, and now banana's not in the book, but banana is a cognate. So don't mind the banana on the screen. So I love to make human charts, especially with elementary students. So what I do is I give them a choice of 3 things. I ask them what they like or what they want to eat or what they eat. Whatever your question is, ask them a question in the target language. Put the 3 items on the ground. I like to go outside or go to the gym. You can put words, images, whatever you want to. Ask them what they eat, what they like, what their favorite is. Put the images out in a line like this. And tell your students to lay down in front of the item that they eat the most, that they like the most, whatever your question might be. Your students have to run to that image and lay down. And so sometimes I have them lay lengthwise like you see them here, but other times I actually have them lay crossways. Crossways doesn't quite make such a long line. So I'm making what I call my human chart. Once everyone is laying down on the ground in front of the item that they have selected, I snap a picture of it, and then I use it to drive all of the conversations that we have for the next day or so, just about what students like to eat and what they eat the most. And I'm not going to talk about caterpillar at all yet. Another day, I might do another kind of chart. In this chart, it's just a Post-it chart. All I do is put the items up on the board, and everyone gets a Post-it note. You write your name on the Post-it note, and you put your Post-it note above the item. Now, because I taught elementary and I taught ESL, I would do these types of charts frequently, and then I would use them to help me do math and to do all sorts of things like greater than and less than and how many more and the most, etc. So beyond just reading and beyond getting your students ready to connect to a text, there are lots of other things that you can do along the way to get additional input. Remember, the purpose of reading is to help you sustain interaction in the target language in a comprehensible way so that your students are getting more and more and more comprehensible input. Don't rush. The whole point of the reading is to provide a platform for you to provide tons of comprehensible input. So here's another chart. I put the other items. You can see I put items from the book. And invariably what would happen is I'd always start out with the pickle and the plum or something. And it was really funny. You'd always have one or two kids that would like the pickle. But then once you put the cupcake into the mix, suddenly all of these names would shift to the cupcake. Then I take all the information from these previous graphs that we have made, take that information, and then you can actually put them into a real graph, and you can show your students what a real graph looks like and build their math skills, and you can do it in the target language. Okay, so now what I'm doing right here is I'm comparing how many people ate apples compared to pears, to plums, to strawberries, etc. So in terms of whole class reading, that's what I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about whole class reading. Everyone was reading the slides with the photos on them. Everyone is reading The Very Hungry Caterpillar together. And so in terms of extending the reading and what we did before, during, and after, The Very Hungry Caterpillar is not a one-day event. It's an ongoing event that happened over the course of a few weeks. Eventually, what I had students do is I had them build their own book. And their book was made out of a paper bag. And so if you teach elementary and you've not done bag books, they're awesome. If you teach high school, I'm going to tell you that even high schoolers love to make paper bag books, but I just have them recreate the story. Now, they had to draw their illustrations. They did not have to. I cheated. All right, I just cheated. So they had to draw their illustrations. But now here was the point of this whole activity. In the real story, the last part of the story is that the caterpillar went to sleep in his cocoon and he woke up and he was a beautiful butterfly. And so when my students create this book, I give them the instructions that I want them to create this book like it's their book and the story's about them. They have to draw themselves. So I start with a school picture on the front of the book. Then they tell me everything they ate, and it can mirror what the caterpillar ate or what it didn't. And at the end, they have to draw what they want to be when they grow up. And so it's just a great little extension for reading. It's really interesting how kids will read a book over and over and over. Once we did this activity, every time it was time for reading, everyone gravitated to The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Why? Because I help them connect to the text. I help to model what it's like to enjoy a read and to get into the reading. And of course, we went on with this story to talk about the migration of the monarch butterfly and how butterflies, are actually born, et cetera, et cetera. Whole class reading builds literacy. Yes, it does. Why? Because students that don't really know how to enjoy reading don't like reading. If you have FER, I'm not knocking FER. I do FER. I think it's wonderful. But if you have readers with weak literacy skills, if you have readers who don't really enjoy reading, they don't really engage fully in FER. Literate readers, fluent readers, yeah, they'll engage in FER. But the reluctant readers will not until we train them how to love a book, how to love reading. So whole class reading builds community. It gives us something in common to talk about. It's that cohesive bond between classmates. And it's even awesome when it provides this cohesive bond between different classes. So if you have groups that are reading the same book, it gives them something that they can actually talk about outside of class. Also, key right here, if you've never taught weak readers, you don't understand the importance of whole class reading, because it's not just about building literacy. I'm going to reiterate it one more time. It's a complete shift in your mindset. It's training students to love to read. We set up reading in many ways to favor well-educated students that have a library at home, students who have been exposed to books, students who have strong literacy skills, and we completely shut down any type of weak reader or readers that don't really enjoy reading. I would be interested to hear, if you did a poll in your classes tomorrow and you asked your students, how many of you really like reading? I would be interested to know how many of them really do like reading. My guess is that there would be a very large percentage that don't like it. So let's really reframe how we define weak reader or weak literacy skills. Let's define a weak reader as anyone who doesn't like to read, because I guarantee we can change that by how we approach reading. Free voluntary reading, if you haven't ever implemented it, I highly suggest that you try it. This is the brainchild of Dr. Stephen Krashen. He has seen lots, he's done lots of research on the impact that FVR has on literacy skills, on your vocabulary, on all types of skills. And there is improvement in reading ability, writing ability, vocabulary, complex grammar, and improvement in spelling. I'm going to reiterate, if someone's not very literate, their growth will be minimal. We can help them grow so much more if we help them to develop strong literacy skills. Let's define strong literacy skills as, let's teach them to love to read. So focus on FVR, yes, absolutely. But remember that in order to really gain anything from FVR, learners have to have some literacy skills. And they have to have access to a wide variety of reading material. And in the case of language acquisition, they have to have access to comprehensible books. I love this tweet from a colleague last year. She was having trouble with a student getting him to engage in any type of reading, and he picked up Felipe Allo during his FBR time. And she says, reluctant learner, teacher, and baseball fan complained of being bored, gave him Felipe Allo, and he devoured it, read past the bell. That's what we're talking about. On the one hand, if we just have really interesting things to read, literate learners will love it. On the other hand, if you have weaker readers, we have to help them learn how to read to enjoy it. So the byproduct of the whole class reading is acquisition. Remember, it's not about reading. It's really our ulterior motive is acquisition. We're just going to use reading to help us facilitate acquisition in the language classroom. And we see instances over and over again that shows us, maybe not empirically, although there is a lot of empirical data, let's just look at all the anecdotal evidence that demonstrates that reading is really powerful to facilitate language acquisition. So one teacher wrote and sent us a note. She said, I'm reading a comprehension-based reader with my first year French students, and they love it. I love watching them acquire language and laugh along the story. And how is she getting them to laugh along the story? All of them by whole class reading. Anyway, so on a whim, she says, I took the book home and I gave it to my son who's in the 4th grade. We made it through 2 chapters when spontaneously one night at dinner, he started summarizing what we had read in French. I was absolutely floored. I'm proud to say that CI-based readers have not only enriched my teaching, but has opened the door to the joy of language acquisition to my son as well. It's about language acquisition. Yes, the joy of language acquisition. That's our ulterior motive, along with teaching them to love the read. So let's look at some of the results from reading a simple little book like Brandon Brown Wants a Dog. It's 100 unique words. Another teacher sent me this little video clip.
Aquí están mis niños hablando sobre el capítulo 1 y 2 de Brandon Brown.
Gracias.
Hola.
¿Cómo estás?
Bien, ¿y tú?
Bien.
¿Qué lees?
Brandon Brown.
Ah, ¿te gustó el libro?
Sí.
¿Por qué te gustó?
Porque Brandon Brown quiere un perro.
¿Y tú quieres un perro? ¿Cómo te llamas?
Gavin.
Gavin, ¿qué tienes tú en las manos?
Los libros de Brandon Brown.
¿Y quién es Brandon Brown?
Es un niño.
¿Y qué pasa con él?
Quiere un perro.
¿Quiere un
Okay,
perro?
You've got the idea. Reading together, whole class reading provides a glue that makes your lessons cohesive and your input comprehensible. Sticking with the same topic and having all sorts, a wide variety of discussions, activities, strategies, all about this topic will really help you keep your input comprehensible. So let's look at what does that chart look like? What are the things that we're doing before we actually read? So remember that pre-reading strategies is really about preparing students to enjoy a text. And I will use a wide variety of resources to help them connect to the characters, to the setting, to whatever topics are embedded in the text. So I'll use movie trailers, video clips. If you've never subscribed to Reading A to Z, I really recommend it. It's a subscription basis. Reading A to Z will provide, I don't know, hundreds, maybe even thousands of readings, all leveled from like AAA to Z. And there's nonfiction and fiction and everything in between. It's just a great way to pull out some level appropriate readings to help your students learn to enjoy reading, to learn more about content. Maybe you have an upcoming book or something that a movie, a video, whatever you're trying to prepare students for. They have lots of texts that can help you prepare students to enjoy it by familiarizing them with the language that's upcoming in the piece that you're using or the content. So I love to use lots of little readings, and I love Reading A to Z. I like using photo prompts. Some people do one-word images, and that's great too. I do one-word images also, but using a photo. I'll give you a few examples of how I do photo prompts. Just reading informational excerpts, sometimes like giving the backstory, providing a little background information is all students really need to connect to a text. All of us have done the proverbial slideshows, and yeah, you know what? Sometimes slideshows are great. They allow you to pull, specific images and with minimal text to provide some information to students. It's great. It could be just what they need to be familiar enough with words so that by the time they would actually, open a newspaper or open a text or a book, whatever it is, to understand the words on the page. I prepare students to enjoy a reading just by asking personalized questions and finding out a little bit more about them and what their opinions are on various situations. And lots of class discussions, just asking questions in general. Finding out what they already know about a situation. What do they want to learn about a situation? In terms of just post-reading, I like to do games a lot, and not games like you're thinking in the traditional sense. I am not cutting out game pieces. I am not laminating anything. I'm talking about games like I'll ask a question, and here's an example. I call this charades, reading charades. And so what I do is I break the class up into groups, and I might have, let's say, 10 groups of 3 to 4 students. And so I pass out a piece of paper, and it might have, let's say, a chapter from a book taped on the paper, and every paragraph is labeled with a letter A, B, C, D, E. Okay, so every excerpt from the text is labeled, and I give every group one of those excerpts. So each group individually has to read their paragraph, make meaning of the paragraph, and then they don't know which group I'm going to call on, I will just call on one of the groups. So if I call out C, the group that's holding paragraph labeled C has to get up and act out their paragraph. They can use no words. It's charades, right? Everything is silent. So they're rereading the text. Of course, each group is rereading only their one paragraph at a time, but they're rereading the paragraph, making meaning out of it. Then the game starts when they get up, they have to act out their paragraph, whoever I call. The group gets up and they act it out, and now everyone else, it's their job to read through the text. I actually have them, they have to have their books in hand. They have to read through the text, and they have to find the scene that was just being acted out. And you're thinking, well, how does that work? What does it do? It forces them in a fun way to reread the text. So I might say, okay, this is from chapter 2. Somebody gets up, they act out the paragraph, and now in chapter 2, you're rereading chapter 2 to try to find the excerpt that would best depict what was just acted out in front of you. That's an example of the type of game that I like to play to revisit and reread and reprocess a text. I like to do lots of sequencing activities. I'll share those in another workshop sometime. I'll be at Mitten. I'll be presenting with Christy Placido and Carrie Toth, and so I'll show you some of my sequencing tricks there. Reader's Theater is another powerful, powerful tool to help weak readers in particular. There isn't a single reader who does not enjoy Reader's Theater. Everyone loves it. And when we really think about what students do as they're reading a text, it's really this continuum of, starting with, simple comprehension, like you comprehend the words on the page. So it's comprehend the words and then process the words and maybe process them at the sentence level. So remember how we're going from that micro to macro comprehension. So they're starting with just comprehending words and phrases, and then they're processing words and phrases at the sentence level, a paragraph level, and making meaning. But yet they still fall short. They're understanding, but they're not enjoying. And why are they not enjoying? Because they aren't visualizing it. Strong readers will always visualize the story. They'll see that story in their head. And so for those of you who enjoy reading, you'll think of books that maybe you have read and then seen the movie and then been incredibly disappointed. Why? Because the characters didn't look like that, and that place didn't look like that, and he didn't look like that, and he didn't say it with that tone. He said it this way. Why? Because we do all those things in our mind. We know how to visualize. This is the missing link for lots of readers, and this is where Reader's Theater is so critical to help them shift from that processing at the sentence level to actually visualizing and seeing that whole story in their mind. So those are the kinds of things that I'm doing. I'm going to show you an example of getting started. Many teachers say, okay, I just don't know how to start. Well, here's what I say. Look at the book. If you don't have a teacher's guide, look at the book. Look at the glossary. Look at the words that are coming up in the read. Definitely look at the first few chapters. If it's an ongoing read, look at the first few chapters. Look at the words. See what you think your students will have to understand in order to enjoy the story. Now, this is an activity from our teacher's guide. I think Carrie Toth actually created this activity, and I love it, and I've done it a million times, and it is always a home run. What we do is we try to connect to the topic of the book. The topic of the book is telling the truth. So that's our topic. We're going to talk about, do you tell the truth? In every given situation. So you might just ask in general, do you always tell the truth? And everyone, well, most people will say, well, most of the time. And then I'm going to pose a situation, and I'm going to ask you that question again. I'm going to say, well, do you always tell the truth, or would you tell the truth in this instance? So here's an example. You break your class, well, your class is together, and your class is going to break up into groups, either 2 to 4 groups, depending on the answer they give you. So your question to them is, do you tell them the truth? This is the Spanish version. Do you tell them the truth? So the situation is this. Your friend has pants that are really a horrible color, do you tell your friend, do you tell him or her the truth? Do you tell them the truth? Is it easy to tell the truth or difficult? So it might be yes or no, you tell them the truth, and so therefore your answers might be yes and no. Maybe your question is going to be, is it easy or difficult to tell them the truth? So the two groups will move. You vote with your feet. It's like 4 corners. Sometimes you put 4 answers. Maybe we would put, it's kind of easy, it's really difficult, it's kind of difficult. Maybe you would make 4 answers, and then everyone would vote for their feet. They'd go to the 4 corners of the room. In this case, I just split the room in half. Is it easy to tell the truth or difficult to tell the truth? So right now I want you to think in your own head, if your friend had pants on and they were ugly or they were a really horrible color, would it be easy or difficult to tell your friend the truth? And we're doing this in the target language, mind you. Everything you see here is in the target language. This is how we would facilitate the activity. And we make it comprehensible by posting words on the board, by using gestures, by doing all the things that we normally do. Well, you'll inspire lots and lots of conversation about if it's easy or difficult to tell the truth. Once students move into position, I will ask them in the target language questions like, okay, which group is the nicest group? ¿Qué grupo es el más simpático? Which group is the nicest group? And you know, they'll say, well, we're nice because we're telling the truth. And the other group says, no, we're nice because we're not telling the truth. Then I'll ask them questions like, well, which group is the most honest? And that spurs more discussion about, is it important to tell the truth? Is it sometimes important not to tell the truth? And I will tell you that within a very short period of time, we're having some really great conversations with very low level language. And you can see a couple of the other situations. Your mom or your grandma, whatever it is, prepared a casserole, a new casserole. It's horrible. Did you tell her the truth? Or this is inspired by Seinfeld. Okay, if you're a Seinfeld watcher, you'll appreciate this one. You're looking at a photo of somebody's baby that is not attractive. Okay, do you tell the mama the truth? All right, I know it's naughty, but it's really funny. So I just flash this up on my screen when I ask a question so that everyone knows which direction they're supposed to go. And we will play this little discussion game all about telling the truth. I'm just showing you one easy way to easily connect to a text and to connect to a text using low-level language. If you know the story of the new Houdini, it's a silly story about Brandon Brown, and he wants to drive his parents' car. And it's called The New Houdini for a reason. If you've not read the book, I'm not going to tell you why. What I'm going to do ahead of time, however, is I'm going to help you connect to the character. So I'm not going to tell students, we're reading the book, The New Houdini, and I want you to know who Houdini is. I might just bring up Houdini just because he's kind of an interesting character. And so one way that I would connect and just pique interest to get students to want to read is I might show this little, I call it a cliffhanger. It's where you take just a little video and you don't show too much, but you show just enough that people will be inspired. This always has the effect of students think about Houdini and they go home and or they actually at lunch, whenever they pull out their phone, they are now Googling Houdini and they're finding out all they can about Houdini. And the next day they come to class and they want me to learn about Houdini and they're telling me things. Try it about whatever topic you're on. Just give them a little cliffhanger like this and stop it. Don't give them any more and see if the effect is not that they are now really interested in this topic. Get them interested, and then by the time you actually get the book out and it's called The New Houdini, see a difference in their engagement level and their desire to want to read. There are all kinds of books. We have serious books too, and if you know the book about Esperanza, it's about a family in Guatemala who had to flee due to political duress. The main character's husband started a union in Guatemala City, and the government was not too happy with them, and he started one of the first strikes ever, and so they put the family on the extermination list, and it's their story. But before I would ever tell anyone about the story, the first thing I would do is, if you're in an area where students don't know about strikes and unions, I would teach them about strikes and unions and how they operate. I would start with basics like the landscape. Like, this is the landscape of Guatemala, and let's compare that to the landscape of maybe Arizona. We would just discuss the differences, maybe in just the landscape, just simple conversation. This might inspire them to talk about places that they've been that might look similar or different, or maybe their favorite places. Remember, we don't care about actually the physical act of reading. We're using reading to camouflage our attempt to engage them in conversation. And so we might let this conversation go to an entirely different place, but we'll eventually bring it back. And maybe this time we'll just talk about maybe a photo of some people that we see. Now, I teach ESL also, and so I do a lot of I wonder activities. I think I originally heard this activity from Beth Skelton. She's a phenomenal ESL teacher also. Anyway, this is a great prompt. If you put up an image and you just ask students to finish the sentence, I wonder. Now, the caveat to this is that your students have to have the linguistic ability to answer the question. Maybe they can't ask questions like, I wonder what they have in their, and that's what I get from students, like, in there, what is that? And so we'll talk about the different things in this culture, the different things that maybe the women use to carry babies or carry firewood. What are those? Are those shawls? Are they blankets? What are those? I wonder where they live. I wonder if they have a baby in their scarf, in their shawl, whatever they perceive that article of clothing to be. Now, if your students don't have the linguistic ability, then what you have to do is you have to give them options. You give them options, and your students have to just select which options would pertain to them. I'll give you an example of that in just a second. Let's look at another image. Let's say that you were going to use, this is a neighborhood in Guatemala City. And so if your students don't have enough linguistic ability to actually produce statements, I will write out statement options. Like, I would say, I wonder where this is. I wonder how many people live in a house. I wonder if they have running water. I wonder if they have electricity. Things like that. And so this is actually a reading activity, and it becomes my prompt for them to really tell me, what are they thinking and what do they perceive in these photos? I like to get my students' ideas and perceptions first before I inform them of anything. I like to get their perception and their experience and their insight, and then we discuss what we see rather than having it be an informational piece. So I'll show them this photo because this is Guatemala City and this is Guatemala City, and it's quite a stark contrast. And then I'll show them yet another one, and this is Guatemala City. And so I might ask these questions. Again, here's an example of when my students can't pose questions themselves, I'll write out questions for them, and all they have to do is put a little check mark if they thought these same things. Where is the dump? What are they doing? Do they live in the dump? Do they work in the dump? Why are they in the dump? We'll have discussions about what they think and what they perceive to be true. And we'll pull up the CIA fact book about Guatemala, and we'll just get some statistics. And then we generally do some comparisons between different countries. And we'll compare and contrast both poverty levels and socioeconomic levels. And I am really interested, and I always compare literacy levels. And so you'll have to try that sometime. You'll find some really interesting information. But again, we look up this information together. I don't tell them, I don't feed them. We learn about it together. It helps them to really engage in the reading. So I like to also, after we have done lots of these types of discussions, I show this video trailer, this movie trailer, and I won't let it go full length. You can always look it up afterwards if you email me or put it, I'm sure Christy and Carrie could refer you to this video. It's called The Landfill Harmonic, and it just ties in beautifully to the discussions that we had previously been having about Guatemala. Now, mind you, this video is not about Guatemala. You'll have to listen and see. It's about Paraguay.
¿Entienden? Bueno, entonces tienen que atender.
Mi nombre es Víctor, toco el cello.
Mi nombre es Ada Maribel Ríos Bogado y toco el violín.
Ahí va.
Kids in Paraguay actually made all of the instruments out of trash.
Look at this. That's a fork, people.
Let the gift of music shine through tonight on that stage.
Okay, sorry, I know. I said I wasn't going to show you the whole thing, and it sucked me right in. I got totally distracted. It's such a great, uplifting type of movie. I think we tend to dwell on all the negatives in groups that are marginalized and downtrodden, and we need to show the world that these are also humans, and that they have the ability to overcome a lot, and especially if they have the assistance of other people that are more fortunate than they are. I love what other people have done, especially with Esperanza. I know that Christy Placido, Carrie Toth, Melissa Lopez, several other individuals have done Pulsera project and given a lot of aid to Kiva projects. And Kiva is really a great program to inspire people to learn a trade and a craft, something that's sustainable. There are lots of things that you can do, and we'll share those with you. I won't share them now, but it's all about using your reading to really inspire acquisition and appreciation and just a love for culture and people, and to inspire people to continue acquiring even after a class has ended. Another nonfiction book is Felipe Alou, and Felipe is my personal hero, and he is the epitome of all things excellent. And in terms of civil rights, people probably don't know that he had a very huge part in, and Major League Baseball in general had a huge part in our civil rights movement. So I am particularly partial to this story, and before we ever crack open the book, I do lots of things to connect to the text first. In fact, I would probably say I spend at least a month or two sometimes, but there's just so much to learn, and there's so many topics to be had before we ever even need to open up the book. So one thing that I do is, of course, I teach my students about, now mind you, remember I'm teaching ESL, English as a Second Language. And so I will teach them MLK speech. And we always start with the basic, I have a dream. And that's where we begin. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Now, for my language learners, they don't even know many of these words. So I just have to start building from the bottom up. And we work on 2 words, dream and judge. Before we ever even get to this point, before we even read this, we'll work on what it means to judge. And so I will give them an example of Judge and Judge Judy, and it's hilarious because Judge Judy is on in many countries and everyone knows Judge Judy. So we talk about how Judge Judy judges legal cases, and then how she looks at evidence. She'll evaluate evidence. If you look at all of these words, most of my English language learners are Spanish speakers. So you can see that I'm using lots of really comprehensible language here, lots of cognates to help them understand. So I will compare, we'll talk about what a judge does, and then we'll compare what a judge does to what an umpire does, because he's like a judge, and he makes decisions, and he evaluates the evidence as well. So we compare, and we can contrast, and we'll have discussions. They'll tell me about the worst umpires, and we'll have some really rousing conversations about the best way to evaluate plays, and also legal cases in some cases also. And then I ask them a question, and they're always kind of stunned. Are you a judge? Like, do you have a law degree? Are you a judge? Because they generally only think of judging in the context of a judge or an umpire. So we have a little discussion about what a judge is, and then I say, okay, we're going to play a game. I'm going to show you photos. I'm going to give you, I don't know, 15 to 20 seconds. And with your partner, I want you to say the first word that comes to your mind when you see this photo. And so I'll show these photos. And I'm not going to pause too long for you, but I would ask you, what's the first thing that came to your mind when you saw this image? And what's the first thing that comes to your mind here? What word? So here and here. Do you judge people? This instantaneously leads us into a really deep conversation about what it is really like as a human being. Do we judge people? Yep, certainly we do. And we have deep discussions. Most of my students are students of color. We have lots of discussions whether or not they are judged by their appearance as well. And so by the time we get to reading Martin Luther King's speech, by the time we get to read Felipe Alou, they are just emotionally engaged. They want to read. They comprehend it so much more, not only because they connect to the topic, but because I have preloaded all of these discussions that we have ahead of time with the language that's coming up in the book. And that's the trick of it. I'll personalize lots of things. The best way to personalize for me is take a photo and start asking questions. Talk about people that inspire them. Use them as your source for your discussion, and see if they don't instantaneously engage. Now I use what you're seeing here. I use these for my strength and agility unit. Again, I teach athletes, so we do need to talk about strength and agility, etc., and speed. And so I use Reading A to Z, various nonfiction reads from Reading A to Z. And we used lots of those little readings to discuss the topic at hand. I took that to actually watching a commercial. And by the time we got to the end, my whole goal was to read about an interview, or actually read an interview with Usain Bolt. And so here is the video of Usain Bolt, and I had the whole interview transcribed, and that was my goal. I wanted them to read about what Usain Bolt does every day to work out for his speed and agility. And I did all those things previously so that they would understand the reading when we finally got to it. So it's really a mindset that we have to change. It's not about the reading. It's not about how quickly can I open this book and how fast should I read it. It's not about making learners read. It's about inspiring them to want to read, to learn, and to acquire language. So that's all I have for you tonight. I could share for hours and hours, but I know you've had a long day. So thanks so much for being here, everybody. I'm going to look at the questions right now because I've neglected many of them. I apologize for that, but I saw my colleagues on here answering lots and lots of questions. Oh gosh, let's see. Are Fluency Matters materials available outside of Facebook? Yes, you can find them at fluencymatters.com. You can also find them at Teachers Discovery. Let's see, if you'd like to learn more about reading with your students, look for Fluency Matters Comprehension-Based Reader Group. Yes, that's a great suggestion. That's a big collaborative group, and I love it because there are always thoughtful questions, and sometimes the questions are things we haven't even thought of, and somebody else will have an answer, so we're all learning and growing together in that group. It's great, I love it. Is the vocabulary of the book included in the pre-activities? Yes. If you're asking about the teacher's guides, yeah, the teacher's guides will have all the chapter vocabulary listed, chapter by chapter vocabulary. So you'll see what vocabulary is coming up in each chapter of the book. I hope I answered that question, if that was your question. I see you put the link to Reading A to Z. Thanks for that. Are there any plans to expand the Italian language offerings? Oh gosh, we're trying so hard. A lot of people have this perception that we are very large. We're not. My language skills only go so far, but we're really working on expanding into Italian. I have a native speaker and she's wonderful and she's been helping me adapt them, and we're working on teacher's guides and other materials. If you know native Italian speakers or very fluent Italian speakers, send them our way because we are eager to get lots of resources for all languages. All right, everybody, thank you so much for a great evening. I appreciate your time.